I'm Melissa, and I'd like to tell you about an experience that might resonate with others. It all began when I was introduced to Thomas by my cousin Anthony, who thought we'd be a great match. Thomas was quite charming, and his demeanor was genuinely engaging. We connected well, and after a year of dating, he proposed. I was ecstatic and eagerly anticipated our life together. Anthony often mentioned that Thomas and I were like a match made in heaven. Our wedding was a dream, beautiful and joyful, surrounded by our loved ones. Shortly after our nuptials, Thomas suggested we move in with his mother, Diana, to help her cope with the loss of her husband and to save money. Initially hesitant, I was eventually persuaded by Thomas's reasoning. Life with Diana started smoothly. She was kind, and we managed to get along well. I assisted around the house, trying to make our living arrangements comfortable for everyone. However, 7 months into our marriage, Thomas suggested that I quit my job to dedicate more time to household duties and to assist Diana more. I loved my job as an accountant, and his suggestion made me uneasy. Yet, after some persuasion, I resigned, believing it was the best decision for our family. Initially, I managed well, engaging in household chores and spending quality time with Diana, learning about her and the family's traditions. Despite missing my work, I believed the sacrifice was worthwhile for the sake of our family harmony. Thomas seemed pleased, and everything appeared to be going well. But as time passed, the dynamics began to shift. Diana's requests grew more frequent and demanding, and Thomas's attitude toward me changed. I increasingly felt viewed not as a partner or a family member, but more like a servant. One morning, as I prepared breakfast, Diana criticized the cleanliness of the living room, despite my having just cleaned it. Her tone was harsh, and when I tried to explain, she only snapped at me to be more thorough. Later that day, Diana complained to Thomas about my supposed negligence, urging him to address it. Frustrated and feeling cornered, I defended myself, but Thomas only echoed his mother, insisting I just do a better job. This experience has been challenging, and I've come to realize the importance of communication and respect in any living arrangement. While I continue to navigate these dynamics, I hope sharing my story helps others feel less alone and more empowered to speak up in similar situations. Living with Diana and Thomas was like walking a tightrope, with my every move scrutinized. Diana's sharp critiques and Thomas's evident disappointment hung over me constantly, making me feel as though I could never do enough to please them. One day, Diana decided on a whim to invite some friends over for lunch, giving me very little time to prepare. Without any regard for my plans, she demanded, "Melissa, I need you to serve lunch to my friends and make sure everything is perfect." As the guests arrived, I served them with a smile, though I couldn't shake the feeling of their judgmental eyes on me. "Is this your daughter-in-law, Diana? She seems a bit overwhelmed," one guest commented audibly. Diana responded with a subtle but cutting remark about my need to improve my household management skills. After the guests left, Diana didn't hesitate to express her displeasure to Thomas. "Melissa was so disorganized today, and her cooking was subpar," she complained. When Thomas confronted me, his face flushed with anger, I tried to defend my efforts, explaining I was doing my best under the circumstances. "That's not good enough. You need to do better," he retorted angrily, dismissing my efforts. The environment grew increasingly hostile. Diana's nitpicking escalated, and Thomas's temper became even more unpredictable. I began to dread the start of each day, fearful of the inevitable criticism. During a rare moment of respite, I tried to enjoy a book in the living room. Diana found me and sharply reminded me of the chores awaiting my attention. "No breaks until all the work is done," she commanded coldly. Later, when Thomas returned home, Diana quickly informed him of my brief pause, painting it as laziness. "You can't just sit around, Melissa. There's always work to be done," Thomas exploded. I explained it was just a short break, but he was unforgiving. "No more breaks. Just do your damn job," he yelled, diminishing me further. Feeling more like a captive than a member of the family, I longed for the independence I once enjoyed. 3 years into our marriage, our daughter Alice was born. She became my sanctuary, my joy amid the storm. I devoted myself to her, hoping to shield her from the turbulent atmosphere of our home. However, as Alice grew, so did Thomas's anger. One particularly harsh evening, he erupted over some minor disorder in the house. "Why is this place such a mess?" he thundered upon entering. I explained I had been busy with Alice all day, but he was relentless. "Your cleaning isn't good enough. You're useless," he shouted, and in his rage, he shoved me, causing me to fall and cry out in pain. Alice's cry of "Mommy," as she ran to my side, broke the tense air. Thomas commanded her to go to her room with a fierce tone, but she stood frozen, witnessing the scene in fright. At that moment, the reality of our situation became painfully clear, and I knew something had to change, for Alice's sake and mine. I started to stutter that night, asking in her shaky voice, "Mommy, are you all okay?" My heart shattered. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's okay," I reassured her, though the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. Her stutter lingered beyond that night, prompting me to seek help from a psychologist. Despite 3 years of sessions, her progress was minimal. It pained me deeply to see her struggle, a direct result of witnessing the chaos at home. Alice's silent observations of our home life worried me immensely. She was learning from Thomas's treatment of me, and the thought of her accepting this as normal, as what family life should be, terrified me. But I felt cornered. Thomas had made it clear repeatedly, everything, the house, the money, belonged to him. He had threatened that if I ever left or sought a divorce, he would take Alice from me. The fear of losing her, my beacon through the darkest days, forced me to endure the constant shouting, the pushing, and the pervasive fear. Staying silent seemed the only option to protect her. Then, one day, a call from my cousin Anthony broke the steady hum of tension. "Melissa, I have some bad news. Your mom passed away," he informed me softly. I hadn't seen my mother in years, as Thomas had forbidden any contact with her. Yet I knew I needed to attend her funeral, to say my final goodbyes. Approaching Thomas, I tried to maintain my composure. "Thomas, my mom passed away. I need to go to the funeral," I said, my voice trembling. Unmoved, he barely looked up from his newspaper. "No, you're not going anywhere. We don't have money for that," he dismissed coldly. Tears rolled down my cheeks as he cruelly denied my plea. "Thomas, please, she was my mom. I have to go," I implored, my voice breaking. But he was resolute. "No, and that's final. You stay here and take care of the house and Alice," he commanded, returning to his reading. Anger and sadness overwhelmed me, but a resolve within me grew. I knew I had to go, no matter his commands. That night, I gently woke Alice. "Sweetie, we're going on a little trip. Be very quiet, okay?" I whispered. "Okay, Mommy," she replied, her voice sleepy and confused. After ensuring everyone was asleep, I packed a small bag for us, took my savings, and quietly left the house with Alice. As we drove toward my hometown, my heart pounded with a mix of fear and determination. We arrived early the next morning, tired but relieved to be away from Thomas, even temporarily. We checked into a small motel and rested a bit before the funeral. The service was split into 2 parts, one for family and another for the public. The family gathering was emotional. I hadn't seen my relatives in years, and it was a time of many tears and hugs. The relief of being with them was palpable. During the service, my phone rang. It was Thomas. In my haste, I accidentally hit the speaker button, and his furious voice filled the room. "Melissa, get your ass back home right now, or I swear to God, I'll file for divorce and take Alice away," he bellowed. The room went silent, all eyes on me, their expressions a blend of shock and sympathy. The reality of my situation was laid bare before my family, marking a turning point in my life. As Thomas's voice blared angrily through the phone speaker during my mother's funeral, my cheeks flamed with embarrassment. I quickly turned off the speaker and mumbled, "I'm at my mom's funeral, Thomas. We'll talk later," before hanging up. Throughout the rest of the service, a knot of shame and anger twisted in my stomach, and his words echoed in my ears, humiliating me in front of my family. Yet, amidst this turmoil, I found a strange sense of clarity. I couldn't continue living like this. After the service, my cousin Anthony approached with a concerned look. "Melissa, you can't go back to that. You deserve better," he insisted, slipping me a piece of paper with a lawyer's contact information. "Call this lawyer. He can help you." Holding the paper, I felt a mixture of fear and hope to stir within me. Maybe this was my opportunity for change. "Thank you, Anthony," I said, my voice thick with emotion. That night, back at the motel, sleep eluded me, but a spark of hope flickered to life inside me. For the first time in a long while, I felt empowered to alter my circumstances for both Alice's and my sake. The morning after the funeral, I awoke with new resolve. I couldn't let fear or Thomas's control dictate my life any longer. My mother had left me her house and some money, a lifeline, and a chance to start anew. With the lawyer's phone number in hand, I decided it was time to act. I took a deep breath and dialed. "Hello, Mr. Jerry, this is Melissa. I'd like to schedule a consultation," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course, Mrs. Melissa. Can you come in this afternoon?" he replied. "Yes, I'll be there," I confirmed, my voice a mix of fear and determination. After dropping Alice off at Anthony's, I headed to the lawyer's office. Despite the nerves, I felt ready to confront the future. Mr. Jerry welcomed me warmly. "Mrs. Melissa, tell me everything," he urged, his voice calm and reassuring. I shared my story, the years of control, the threats, and the violence. He listened attentively, jotting down notes. "We need solid evidence of the abuse, both physical and emotional," he advised. "Record everything. Keep a detailed journal." I nodded, a plan forming in my mind. "I'll do that. I'll record every incident and write down everything," I promised. After the meeting, I purchased a new smartphone, a small act of rebellion, and a step toward reclaiming my independence. I set it up with a secure passcode and tested the recording function. I needed to be prepared for anything. Feeling more equipped, I returned to Anthony's house to pick up Alice. She seemed happier and more relaxed than I'd seen her in months. "Ready to go home, sweeties?" I asked, hugging her. "Yes, Mommy," she replied with a smile. As we drove back to Thomas and Diana's house, a mix of dread and determination settled over me. I knew I was returning to a hostile environment, but this time I was armed with a plan and a newfound strength. This time, I was prepared to stand my ground. As soon as I walked through the door, Diana was waiting, her expression one of clear disapproval. "Where the hell have you been, Melissa? Do you think you can just waltz in and out as you please?" she snapped. "I was at my mother's funeral, Diana." "I told Thomas," I responded, ensuring my voice remained steady. "Well, you're back now. Get to work. This house won't clean itself," she retorted, turning away with a dismissive huff. Taking a deep breath, I turned on my new phone and discreetly slipped it into my pocket, starting the recording. I was determined to document every harsh word and aggressive act. As I went about my chores, I carefully captured each encounter. When Thomas returned home, his fury was palpable. "Melissa, what the hell were you thinking, leaving like that without my permission?" he shouted. "I went to my mom's funeral, Thomas." "I had to go," I replied, my heart racing. "You don't do anything without my say-so. Do you hear me?" he yelled, his face red with anger. "Give me your phone and purse," he demanded. I handed him my old phone, grateful for my foresight. His attempts to intimidate me were not going to work anymore. I was quietly gathering evidence, building my case, and planning my escape. That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat down with my journal. I meticulously wrote down everything that had occurred since my return, every insult, every threat. I felt a new sense of purpose, a determination to see this through. The following days were challenging. Thomas and Diana's hostility did not wane, but I continued to record and document their behavior, building my case piece by piece, readying myself for the fight ahead. During dinner one night, Diana resumed her usual tirade. "You're nothing but a disgrace, leaving the house without Thomas's permission." She sneered at me, her eyes filled with disdain. "Diana, don't insult me in front of my daughter," I responded, striving to keep my voice calm yet firm. Thomas's face flushed with anger. "How dare you raise your voice at my mother?" he bellowed, pushing me hard. I stumbled but managed to stay upright. He then raised his hand, his eyes alight with fury. "You live here on borrowed rights, Melissa. Don't forget that," he shouted. I took a deep breath, a strange calm overtaking me. "I want a divorce, Thomas," I stated clearly. His face turned an even deeper shade of red, and he screamed, "You belong to me. You'll be my property until death." This time, I wasn't scared. My phone was securely in my pocket, recording every word. For the first time, I felt a sense of control. Over the next week, I diligently continued to record every insult and threat from both Thomas and Diana. Each time they belittled or threatened me, I discreetly turned on my new phone's recorder. Diana was relentless. "You're worthless, Melissa. Can't even keep a house clean," she would sneer. I carefully noted everything in my journal. Every insult, every harsh word. It was all crucial for building my case. Thomas was no less harsh. "You think you're tough now? You'll never leave me. You're nothing without me," he would shout. But I remained calm, recording his tirades and adding them to my growing list of evidence. It was exhausting but necessary. One day, I caught Diana raging at me in the kitchen. "You're a disgrace to this family, Melissa. Leaving the house like that," she spat. I recorded her words, each one fueling my resolve even further. With every passing day, my resolve grew stronger. I was on a mission to gather all the evidence necessary to secure a safer future for Alice and myself. The week following my mother's funeral had been one of the toughest yet, filled with tension and hostility at home, but it had also instilled in me a newfound sense of purpose. Unable to bear the oppressive atmosphere any longer, I reached out to Mr. Jerry, my lawyer. "Mr. Jerry, it's Melissa. I've collected all the evidence. It's becoming unbearable here," I said, doing my best to keep my voice steady. "Melissa, your cousin has taken the initiative to hire a private investigator to look into your husband. The investigator has uncovered some significant information. Can you meet with him today?" Mr. Jerry replied. "Of course, I'll go right away," I responded, a mix of fear and anticipation coursing through me. Driving to meet the private investigator, I felt nervous yet determined. When I arrived, he greeted me with a grave expression. "Melissa, I've been investigating your husband's activities. He's involved in fraudulent schemes and has ties to criminal activities. The police have been monitoring him, but they lacked sufficient evidence until now," he explained, handing me a folder. "This folder has everything. Consider it your freedom folder," he stated. Grasping the folder with trembling hands, I felt the immense weight of its contents. "Thank you. This means everything to me," I managed to say, my voice quivering. I drove home, my mind swirling with the implications of the folder's contents for Alice and me. As I pulled into the parking lot, Thomas was waiting, his expression contorted with anger. "Where the hell have you been, Melissa? Get in the house now," he shouted, his eyes brimming with menace. A surge of fear washed over me, but I knew I had to remain composed. Instead of exiting the car, I quickly called Anthony. "I'm at home, and Thomas is furious. I have the evidence. Can you call the police?" I said, my voice trembling. "Stay in the car, Melissa." "I'll call them right now," Anthony replied. Thomas, seeing that I wasn't complying, yanked the car door open and dragged me out. "You don't listen. You think you can defy me?" he screamed, pulling me towards the house. At that moment, the police arrived, their lights flashing. I collapsed on the asphalt, overwhelmed by the tension, and burst into tears. The officers quickly intervened, separating Thomas from me and arresting him. They took the folder with the evidence, and I watched as they led him away, a mix of relief and disbelief washing over me. After the police took Thomas away, Diana stormed into the house, furious. "You ungrateful woman. We took you in, and this is how you repay us," she spat, her voice laced with venom. I remained silent, knowing that any response would be pointless. Quickly, I packed our belongings, with Alice clinging to my side, sensing the tension but remaining quiet. With our bags in hand, we walked out of that house, a profound sense of relief enveloping us. I rented a small apartment nearby. It was modest, but felt like a palace compared to the nightmare we had left behind. As the trial approached, Mr. Jerry was instrumental in preparing our case. He assured me that we had a strong case with the accumulated evidence, the recordings, the journal entries, and the documents provided by the private investigator. On the day of the trial, I entered the courtroom, a mixture of fear and hope stirring within me, but I held my head high, determined to fight for my and Alice's future. Mr. Jerry presented all the evidence, systematically. It was overwhelming to relive everything, but I knew it was necessary to finally break free. When the judge finally spoke, I held my breath, waiting for the verdict that would determine our future. Based on the evidence presented, I grant the divorce and full custody of the child to Mrs. Melissa, the judge declared. He continued, the defendant is also ordered to provide financial compensation for moral and physical damages and to pay alimony for life. Because Thomas and Diana were unable to pay the compensation, they were forced to sell their house. Thomas was also sentenced to 6 years in prison for his fraudulent activities and the abuse he had inflicted. Back at home, I gently explained the outcome to Alice in terms she could understand. "Are we safe now, Mommy?" she asked, her eyes wide with hope. "Yes, Alice. We're safe and we're free to live our lives the way we want," I replied, my voice choked with emotion as tears of joy streamed down my face. After the trial, we moved back to my hometown, into my late mother's house. It felt like returning home after a long, dark journey. The house, filled with memories, brought a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. My cousin Anthony helped me secure a job at a local charity that supports women in difficult situations. It felt rewarding to use my experience to help others who had faced similar struggles. Alice quickly adapted to our new life. Freed from Thomas and Diana's toxic influence, she blossomed. Her stuttering disappeared, and she seemed happier and more confident. 6 years later, an unexpected call disrupted our peace. It was Thomas. "Melissa, it's Thomas. I want to see my daughter," he demanded, his voice harsh and commanding. A surge of anger washed over me, but I remained firm. "No, Thomas, you lost that right. Don't bother us again," I said and hung up the phone. Looking out the window at Alice, who was playing joyfully in the yard, I felt a profound sense of peace. We had come so far, and I was determined to protect our new life. As I raised Alice, I focused on teaching her to be strong and independent and to always stand up for herself. I wanted her to grow up knowing her worth and never to be controlled or belittled by anyone. This new chapter was about empowerment and ensuring Alice knew she was valued, loved, and free.